I was running a division of Warner Brothers which was known as the Commercial and Industrial Film Division. And obviously that's what we made. We made television commercials and industrial films. And we had a series that was known as the Bell Science Series, sponsored by AT&T, and there was animation in that. Frizz was assigned to do parts of these shows, the animated parts of them, and we got to know each other and really establish a rapport. One day, I got a call from the boss, Jack Warner, and he said, "David, I don't like the guy that's running the animation division, and I'm going to fire him. Can you take over your responsibilities with the commercial, industrial, and combine it with the animation division?" He says, "I know, you guys are doing so much animation, you must know something about how animation works." "Yeah." I said, "Sure, boss." Well, anyway, he did fire this guy, and I went down, my offices then were down in the animation division, and Frizz and I then had the opportunity to really work together. Well, I didn't have that job very long, because a year after I took over, I was called to a board of directors meeting at Warner Brothers in New York, and given the glad tidings that they had decided that they no longer wanted to be in the animation business. They had enough cartoons. Forget it, it's over already. So anyway, they said, "Well, you got a lot of stuff in production. How long is it going to take to, get rid of everything?" I said, "It's going to take at least a year." I said, "Okay, that's fine." Anyway, as it was winding down, they told me, "Now you don't have to worry, you'll have a job. We want to bring you up into the then new television division." When they were making Maverick and 77 and those shows, and we're going to make you a producer. Okay. Well, I decided that I'd like to kind of get off on my own and start my own studio, because Hanna-Barbera had really just got started. Filmation really hadn't started yet, and I needed to have a creative director to work with. And I had my choice, because Freleng, Chuck Jones, and Bob McKinson were all getting fired. Okay, I, throughout the years, had the best rapport with Frizz. He and I really became quite close friends, aside from the working relationship. So I approached him and I said, "Frizz, I'd like to start an animation studio. Would you like to come in as my partner?" And he thought about it for 2 or 3 days, and he says, "I think that's a good idea. Let's do it." And that's how Depatie Freleng was formed. At first, we had television commercials. I had all my connections with the major ad agencies, from my work at Warner's in the commercial division, and they were very good. They gave us a lot of work, and so we were able to exist, and I didn't have to worry so much about making the payroll next week. We, along with the Leo Burnett agency, created Charlie the Tuna. And Charlie the Tuna, went on. I don't know if they're still using him or they're not, but anyway, tell them Charlie sent you. And that was a big number with us. And we had a fellow by the name of Phil Monroe, who was the director of all those commercials. And Leo Burnett liked Phil so much, they hired him away from us, took him back to Chicago, and made him the head of, he was the creative director for all of their animation. Another one that is probably not as well known, because they haven't used him in years, there was a character that looked like kind of a parrot called Sharpie that worked for Gillette. And I don't know whether that means anything to you, whether you remember, but Sharpie was one of Frizz's personal creations, and he worked with for a long time for Gillette. Then one day the telephone rings, and On the other end is Blake Edwards. I had known Blake through an uncle of his by the name of Owen Crump. Owen Crump was a producer at Warner Brothers, and through that relationship I had met Blake 2 or 3 times. He says, "David, I understand you're in the animation business now. I'd like to see you." Okay. I go over to see Blake, and he hands me this script, and I look at it, The Pink Panther. He said, "You know, this is a live-action movie. I really don't know, where there's a place for animation. But what I'd like you to do is to design me a Pink Panther. What does the Pink Panther look like?" So we went back and got our guys together, and primarily a character designer layout guy by the name of Holly Pratt. Holly must have done at least 100 different renditions of a panther. I mean, again, what does a Pink Panther look like? The only thing we had to go by was in the film itself, the whole thing is about the jewel, that gets swiped back and forth. But in this jewel, this diamond is an imperfection. And this imperfection looks like a leaping pink panther. Okay. Anyway, we designed some stuff for him, and one Sunday we took him over to his house, and he spread him out in his living room floor, and he walked around. He's a pretty decisive guy, at least he was in those days. And he said, "That's the one I want." And the panther was born. Anyway, that's how it got started, and I said to myself, is there life after the main title for this character? And I said, yes, there is. So I went to see the Mirishes. We called them in those days the 3 wise men. There was Harold, who's long gone. There was Marvin, who's also gone now. And there's Walter, who is the remaining one of the 3. And I said, I think we can do something here with this character. Can you get me a deal with United Artists to make a theatrical cartoon? Because again, this was what was done in those days. That was really the heart and soul of animated cartoons, was the theatrical release of these shorts. Anyway, he said, I'll see what I can do. And anyway, about a week later, he called me back and he says, they're very interested in this. As a matter of fact, they're so interested, they want to give you a contract for 167 6-minute shorts to be made over a period of 5 or 6 years. And I said, well, that's incredible. I can't believe it. But I said, there's one hitch, the 3 wise men. All my life, and Frizz's as well, all we've done is work for a salary. We're not going to do that anymore. I want to own 1/3 of the copyright of this character. They just about threw me out of the office. I mean, I'm scared enough anyway. These moguls, these big-time movie executives. Anyhow, what happened about a week later, Harold Mirish called me and he said, go see our lawyers. Okay, went in. Indeed, they had a contract for the 167 cartoons, and the copyright was to be owned by Mirish 1/3, Jeffrey 1/3, and Depatie Freleng 1/3. Anyway, the first cartoon we made was called The Pink Fink, and it was kind of the frosting on the cake because that year, '64, The Pink Fink won the Academy Award for the best cartoon. After the Panther, United Artists wanted to have something else in addition to the Panther, so we came up with the second series, which was Inspector Clouseau. And then after Inspector Clouseau was the Ant and the Aardvark. Then there was the Tijuana Toads, which we had to change for television purposes to the Texas Toads because of the ethnic problem. Then there was the Blue Racer, and you know, it went on and on pretty good. The original Pink Panther television shows, the Saturday morning shows, which debuted on NBC, and I'm going to say about 1967, maybe 66. These were nothing more than the reconstituted theatrical cartoons, and they were bridged with new animation material and in between, because there were 3 of them in the half hour, them being 6-minute shorts. The rest, of course, was commercial time. Another story that sort of ties into this thing is right after the Panther won the Academy Award that year, we get a call from Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers says, hey, we've reconsidered this. We're sorry we got out of the animation business. Well, what prompted this was the fact that television was now among us. And they really needed, you know, some additional material to make what then became the Bugs Bunny show. So we got a contract for a number of new Bugs and Daffies, and I think some Roadrunners. I think maybe they gave us an order for 39 new cartoons. So we were really humping, I mean, with all this stuff all of a sudden. Our mentor at NBC, Larry White, who was vice president in charge of children's programming, which meant Saturday morning programming, asked us if we could come up with an original concept. And he wanted something that was more or less a fantasy adventure type of thing. He couldn't get Oz out of his mind. And so we went to work on this. And one of the things that I think you'll pick up especially is that as we were coming up with the concept for the Grump and the Dragon, Frizz really, I mean, this is Yosemite Sam. Hey, go Dragon, go, go. You know, this is so that was the first element that kind of came into being, was the Grump and the relationship to the Dragon. And then, of course, we were very fortunate in getting Rip, Rip Taylor, and he was doing Vegas work then, a lot of cabaret stuff, and I think he went on to do a lot of television work, didn't he? I think from there. Anyway, he was absolutely sensational as the Grump. As the show started to take form, Larry White, you know, was very, very interested in it, and it's one of those shows that we had to do very little work to sell it to him. He was very interested in the chase element, the fantasy line, going to all these different types. I mean, it could be the Munchkins, it could be the Gillikins, it could be, you know, all the Oz. I mean, he loved it. So he bought the show. I have to give most of the credit to our real genius, John Dunn. Johnny did a lot of that, and another writer we had, Don Christensen. You'll see all these names, and they were very instrumental in framing all this together. And it was, once we got into it, it was interesting how it flowed, because you'd think you'd run out of gas, but the imagery of this show was just absolutely fascinating. How we had come up from the Bloony Woonies to the Eeny Meeny Miners, you know, or the Doors. It was one of the most interesting and satisfying projects I've ever been involved with. Very much so. Very much so. Fortunately, we weren't too much a part of that, because in 1980, Frizz and I went through the Warner Brothers syndrome. We looked at each other and we said, hey, we're working awful hard. We got enough cartoons. Why do we need to do this anymore? And by that time, the pool of royalties coming in from our copyright ownership from MGM was getting up there, and we said, you know, let's forget about it. Let's put the fork on the wagon. And so we made the conscious decision to really break up the studio, and that's exactly what we did. But my point is, up to that point, there was still a great deal of interest in Saturday morning cartooning. Now, what happened was, after that, there was a trend to go to a lot of live shows, and the market began to dwindle, you know, as the networks pumped in more live stuff. And there just wasn't the market, because after Frizz and I split up, Depatie Freleng, Frizz went on to work at Hanna-Barbera for a very short period of time. As a matter of fact, we did a series over there with our studio gone called Pink Panther and Sons, excuse me. And we did all that over at Hanna-Barbera, and Frizz was in charge of the unit over there. I went the other way. One of our really good licensees when we had Depatie Freleng was Marvel Comics. And we did Spider-Woman and the Fantastic Four. And we licensed the properties from Marvel. Well, I got to know Stan Lee and, you know, all the rest of the guys in the Marvel organization. And so when the time came for Frizz and I, when we split up, I got a call from the president of Marvel, come on in to New York and see me. And I did. He said, would you be interested in setting up a new production company for us? We don't want to license things anymore. We want to own the whole enchilada. And we want to go into the production business. So I thought about it, and I sure liked Stan Lee. He and I got along famously, and I accepted the position, and I became the first president and CEO of Marvel Productions. And I had a 4-year contract, and I worked there, I guess, since through 1985, as I remember. And but even during that period, it was beginning to be more and more difficult to sell the animated cartoon to the Saturday morning marketplace. I'll tell you one thing that I think has really progressed in the animated cartoon area. I think today that the guys are out there doing this stuff, they're working with much better tracks. A lot more creativity is going into scripting, you know, which, of course, for us with the Panther, pantomime, it was zilch. But anyway, a lot of thought is going into scripts today. And I think that with the enhancement of the computer-generated stuff, I think the product is pretty good. And just because it may not be my cup of tea as a traditionalist, nevertheless, it's some pretty good stuff that's being done. It's been a wonderful, satisfying career. When I graduated from Berkeley, I was all set to go to law school at Stanford, and I often think, and I told my father, I said, you know, I'm not cut out for this. I don't want to do this. And I often wonder what would have happened to me if I'd have become a lawyer. But anyway, I'm glad I didn't become a lawyer. And another thing I cherish so much is my relationship throughout the years with my partner. Frizz was the greatest. There's nobody that could touch him. And I know there's a lot of people are in Chuck Jones camp, and that's fine. But for my taste, Chuck Jones couldn't hold his pencil.